One of the great gifts I took from the Renaissance garden was this realization that we were walking the mind, that different environments were created to create context and inspiration for different questions. And with that key in mind, my garden that I've created over these many years brought about the emergence of the Philosopher's garden that I dedicated to my dear friend Leigh Albuquerque and the loss of her studio and art after the fire of 2018 that struck here as well. But like the fire, and like the honoring here, and like the story behind the name of this garden, which is the Philosopher's Garden, we start to see nine. We start to see a fundamental structure. And if we think about the Zen of contemplation, or we start to think about sacred hieroglyphs and forms in place, they're not in motion, they're stable. And they begin to inform us that we are not making it up as we go along, but actually we are gathering and are the outcome of this greater instrumentation that says, trust that you don't need to reinvent that. And that's why questions such as liberty or freedom or independence become so fascinating, because you could say, is this a personal sense of liberty and freedom and independence, which is important? Are liberty and freedom and independence a question that has been asked fundamentally in a structure that says what we have done and what we are doing is creating a foundation within which to have a conversation, to create a setting? And that's one of the questions about politics these days, and divisiveness and division, where we can't really talk, where we shout, where we take sides. And when we begin to understand the nature of who and what we are, it says maybe the conversation that is political, that uses freedom and liberty and these statements to justify whatever their particular vision of things might be, that's the nature of that game. It's not to be changed anymore. You can smooth out the ocean. But to recognize one's relationship with that game, and to say, is there a way philosophically, this is why I've always loved philosophia, wisdom, which is the conversation, not the debate, but the sense that is there a place where we gather and we begin to say, could liberty, could freedom begin with how I treat myself, what I allow myself to believe? How enslaved am I to a belief system? What am I agreeing to? And is it something I actually live with, or something that's in this outer world that I've adopted as my greater authority? And the truth here, and I believe the garden here, and the gift here, is this is about contemplation. It's not about correction. It's not about being informed, oh, guess what, you're wrong again, or there's something you're doing that you shouldn't be doing, but actually a return to a setting that begins to tell us a story that nothing is done for us here. One can't be contemplated here. So when we contemplate, what are we doing? We're connecting. We're creating a permission that allows us to draw to ourselves a story that begins to examine what are the cues about the things I think of as freedom. Well, the freedom to love. The freedom to look at a dark story and to begin to see, can I find the light? Can I transmute it? Can I add something to the conversation? And that's one of the fundamental mathematical hidden symbolisms here, that as we begin to recognize that when we organize along the lines of this feels right, my heart feels at home here. Here I'm not shouting at my neighbor. Here I'm saying, what do you think? Join me. Let's sit a while and remember that we might be in time, but our hearts are very ancient and our souls are very weary. So let's stop trying to impress the neighbor who doesn't care anyway. But realize that here maybe, in the garden of the soul, and here in the Philosopher's Garden, in the mathematics of our greater consciousness, we're finally being asked not to be against something, not to fall into the politics of how do I use these understandings to be against, but how do I actually say, I reclaim them to begin with myself. Because if I feel inward liberty, I don't do it at the expense of yours. If I honor freedom, I don't honor freedom because I deny you yours. But in the action of my own, I begin to realize you as well, because these stories are the stories of generosity. They are not to lift one of us, but to lift all of us. And this is the dynamic engine here, you would say, both symbolically and structurally. That like ensemble, once we begin to recognize you can hold your point of view and thank you, it is not mine. And you can hold your point of view and thank you, it is not mine. But together we begin to understand the point of view is about a greater question. And that's why as we think about liberty or we think about freedom, we think about self-reliance, it isn't how do I need to change you in order to clarify that I am right, but actually, as we find in the context of intimate space, of the garden, of these timeless truths, that where your heart is, what you love, and the eyes of those you love, if they are your guide, you begin to say, I want, at least in this story, to begin to move beyond the politics of what I'm against, and begin to move into the story of what and how maybe the human being, which I am, which we are, is always responsible for saying, let my liberation be that which frees not simply myself, but my vision of the world that sees a greater beauty in the chaos, a greater possibility in the impossibility, and a greater wonder even in the darkness of things, because we don't look at ourselves solely alone. But like in the Philosopher's Garden, we say, maybe we've been working on this for so long we can't remember. But as we do, we begin to trust our roots and recognize that it's not the outer that changes things. It's the inner story that begins to liberate in a way that oxygenates perception, liberates the heart, and finally allows the soul to realize that in the generosity of my spirit, every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you, and atoms are not in time or in space. They're in the qualities of love that form into the thing we think of as ourselves. So here, let us honor those things. Let us honor true freedom, freedom from the known, and freedom of the known.